The wardrobe corridor on a major studio lot in 1937 was not a place that tolerated ambiguity. Every rack had a purpose. Every garment carried instructions. The women who passed through those corridors passed through them, inside a set of expectations so thoroughly enforced that most never thought to question them. The dress code was simply the air, and you breathed it or you left. Katharine Hepburn had been breathing it differently for years, arriving each morning in trousers, moving through the lot with the physical economy of someone who had decided, at some earlier point, that the question of her appearance was not a question open for discussion. The studio had tolerated this for reasons that made commercial sense at the time. In 1937, those reasons were reviewed. An ultimatum was issued by a man who had issued ultimatums before, and whose ultimatums had always produced the expected result. This one did not. The studio system in 1937 was not a metaphor. It was a legal structure, and it worked. A contract at RKO Pictures meant the studio owned your working hours, your public image, and the terms under which that image could be altered, loaned, or discontinued. For women under contract, this extended to wardrobe, not as a courtesy, but as a clause. The approved silhouette for a leading actress was not a suggestion. It was part of what the studio had purchased. Katharine Hepburn had signed her first RKO contract in 1932. By 1936, she had received 4 Academy Award nominations. She was, by any measurable standard, one of the most critically recognized performers the studio had under contract. She was also, by the accounting of several regional theater owners, increasingly difficult to sell to audiences in the American interior, where her angular manner and unconventional appearance registered as off-putting rather than electric. Studio records from that period indicate that her last 3 pictures had underperformed against projections. The man responsible for managing this problem was not a villain. He was a production executive, doing what production executives were employed to do: protect the studio's investment by controlling the variables. Hepburn's trousers had been a variable for 5 years, on set between setups, at the studio commissary. Photographs had appeared in the trade press. Letters had arrived from exhibitors. The calculus that had previously favored tolerance was shifting. He scheduled the meeting for a Tuesday morning. He had made his position clear to staff before Hepburn arrived. He expected the matter to be resolved within the hour. She arrived on time, which was something people who worked with her consistently noted. Not early, not late. On time, in the manner of someone who respected schedules without being governed by them. The office was on the 2nd floor of the administration building, a room that smelled of cigarette smoke and the particular staleness of air that had circulated through too many difficult conversations. He was already seated when she entered. He did not stand. The matter, he explained, was straightforward. The studio had received communications from exhibitors in multiple markets. Her on-lot appearance had generated press coverage that complicated the image RKO had built around her. A woman in her position, he said, owed certain obligations to the institution that had made her visible. The obligation in question was simple. On set and on the lot, she would wear a dress. Hepburn listened without interrupting. Those present recalled that her expression did not change. She sat with her hands folded, her posture neither stiff nor relaxed, simply still, in the manner of someone absorbing information rather than receiving a threat. When he finished, she said, "All right." He took this as agreement. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. He told his assistant afterward that the matter was settled. He was mistaken about what she had agreed to. The distinction would become apparent the following morning when Hepburn arrived on the lot, and the wardrobe staff discovered that her trousers were not in her dressing room. Someone had removed them overnight under instruction and left a dress in their place. She assessed the situation without apparent agitation. The dress hung on the rack. The trousers were gone. The wardrobe assistant assigned to her dressing room found something pressing to attend to on the opposite side of the room. Hepburn considered her options for a brief period. Then she removed the dress from the rack, set it aside, and changed into what she had. She walked out onto the lot in her underwear. The crew on Stage 7 saw her first. Then the electricians working the cable run between buildings. Then a group of extras assembled near the catering station who stopped eating. She moved at her usual pace, following her usual route, with the physical composure of someone on an unremarkable errand. Accounts from studio staff who witnessed it differ on certain details, but agree on the essential fact. She did not appear to be making a point. She appeared to be going to work. Word reached the executive's office within 20 minutes. The precise nature of his response was not recorded, but its practical outcome was. Within the hour, a production assistant delivered Hepburn's trousers to her dressing room. No note accompanied them. No meeting was scheduled. No formal acknowledgement was made that anything unusual had occurred that morning. She changed, returned to the set, and completed the day's work on schedule. The dress code was not formally revised. It simply ceased to apply to her, without announcement, without negotiation, and without a single word spoken in her defense by anyone other than her own behavior. The victory, such as it was, lasted about a year. In May of 1938, an advertisement appeared in the Hollywood Reporter, placed by the Independent Theater Owners of America. It listed, by name, the contract players whose films had underperformed in their markets, and whom they considered liabilities to exhibitors nationwide. The language was direct. The actors named, the advertisement argued, were box office poison. Katharine Hepburn was on the list. Her previous 4 films at RKO had lost money against their production costs. Quality Street had performed poorly in rural markets. Bringing Up Baby, which would later acquire a devoted following, was considered at the time of its release a commercial disappointment significant enough to prompt a formal review. Studio correspondence from that period indicates that her contract renewal was discussed and declined. RKO did not fire her in the conventional sense. They simply declined to offer her another picture, which produced the same result with less paperwork. The press covered the list extensively. The narrative that emerged was consistent. Hepburn was too strange, too angular, too unwilling to be managed. Difficult. The word appeared in multiple columns across multiple publications within the same week. She did not issue a statement. She did not grant interviews disputing the characterization. She settled her affairs in Los Angeles and went to New York, which the industry read as retreat. It was not retreat. She had seen a play on Broadway the previous season, and she had gone back to New York to buy it. The Philadelphia story had opened at the Shubert Theater in March 1939, with Hepburn in the lead role. It had been written by Philip Barry, in part with her in mind, and it was, by any measure, the most successful stage production of that theatrical season. Audiences who had been told she was unmanageable watched her work for 2 hours and disagreed. Before the play closed its Broadway run, Hepburn had purchased the film rights. She paid approximately $30,000 of her own money. This was not an impulsive decision. She had consulted with her father, a surgeon of practical temperament who had always treated her professional choices as engineering problems rather than artistic ones. The structure of the acquisition was deliberate. She owned the property. She would determine the conditions of its sale. Those conditions were specific. She would play the lead. She would have approval over the director. She would have approval over her 2 principal co-stars. She would receive a percentage of the profits above a negotiated threshold. Any studio that wanted the property accepted these terms in full, or did not receive an offer. Several studios passed. MGM did not. Louis B. Mayer's team negotiated with her for the better part of 3 weeks. The final agreement retained every condition she had stipulated. George Cukor would direct. Cary Grant and James Stewart would co-star, both at her request. Her salary was set at a figure that reflected the leverage she was now carrying, rather than the leverage she had carried 2 years prior. The woman the industry had declined to renew was now setting terms with the most powerful studio in Hollywood. The Philadelphia story was released in December 1940. By the end of its initial run, it had grossed approximately $3 million domestically, placing it among the top 5 highest-earning pictures of the year. It received 6 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture. Hepburn was nominated for Best Actress. The trade publications that had printed the box office poison advertisement 18 months earlier covered the nominations without revisiting what they had written. There was no formal correction. There was no editorial acknowledgement that the calculus had changed. The industry simply updated its position, the way water finds a new level, quietly and without ceremony. The calls resumed. Contract offers arrived with terms that bore no resemblance to the terms she had been offered at RKO in 1937. The studios that extended them did not reference the intervening period. Neither did she. At some point in the months following the film's release, she returned to work on a lot she had not visited since the conclusion of her RKO contract. The specific date was not recorded by anyone present. What several crew members from that production later recalled was that she arrived in the morning wearing trousers, moved through the wardrobe corridor at her usual pace, and took her place on the set without incident. No one said anything, not because the dress code had been formally amended, not because a memo had circulated, but because the person most qualified to enforce it had watched what happened the last time someone tried, and had quietly decided that the matter was no longer worth the conversation. In a 1979 interview, a journalist asked her about the trouser incident. It had become, by that point, a minor legend in the industry, the kind of story that circulates through studio lots for decades, acquiring details and losing accuracy in roughly equal measure. The journalist wanted to know if she had planned it, whether the whole sequence had been strategic from the beginning. Hepburn considered the question for a moment. Then she said that planning had nothing to do with it. She had worn trousers because they were practical, and because she saw no reason not to. The studio had disagreed. She found their disagreement unpersuasive. What she said next was the part that stayed with the people who read it. The studio, she explained, had been fighting an image of her, an image they had constructed and wanted to maintain. They were not, in any meaningful sense, dealing with the actual person. And that, she said, was why they lost. You cannot win an argument against someone by insisting they become someone else. The insistence just tells them how clearly you have failed to see them. She paused in the transcript. Then she added, in the flat declarative manner that characterized most of her public statements, "The only fights worth having are the ones where you already know who you are. Everything else is just noise." She said it as though it were obvious, as though the decade it had taken her to demonstrate it had been, in retrospect, a minor inconvenience. By the mid-1950s, the architecture of the studio system had begun to change in ways that made the contract structures of the 1930s look like a different industry entirely. The long-term exclusive agreements that had given studios ownership over a performer's image, wardrobe, and public behavior were being renegotiated, challenged, and in several cases, dissolved. The legal mechanisms that had made the dress code conversation possible in 1937 were losing their teeth. Several actresses who negotiated their own terms during this period cited Hepburn directly when explaining their approach. The principle they described was consistent. Know what you will not surrender before you enter the room, and do not enter the room until you know. Katharine Hepburn won 4 Academy Awards over the course of her career. It remains the highest total in the history of the award. The executive who had arranged the Tuesday morning meeting in 1937 retired from the industry in 1951. He did not, in any recorded interview or correspondence, address the incident. The Independent Theater Owners of America dissolved their association in 1966. The Hollywood Reporter archived the 1938 advertisement without annotation. Hepburn worked until she was 81. She wore trousers to the end. In that 1979 interview, the journalist asked her one final question: whether she considered what she had done an act of courage. She looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone being asked to confirm that water runs downhill. "I considered it," she said, "an act of accuracy."